Hello there and welcome to my Arty Corner here on YouTube. My name's Angela Porter, and amongst other things I'm an artist. I'm best known for my colouring book arts, and I'm very much influenced by nature, by architecture, by pattern, by abstraction of patterns from things and forms, textures, and I tend to do a lot of pen drawing, but I also enjoy textile work and all sorts of things, and I'm gradually beginning to work out sometimes that colour isn't me, but I'm working on it, and sometimes it's traditional media isn't the best for me, but there we are. So thank you so much for joining me. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. If you visit regular, please definitely do subscribe, and also click the bell button so you get notifications. And thank you for all the likes, the shares, the comments, the shout outs, the tags in posts so I can see them. If I haven't got to see anything you've sent me, please knock on a messenger or something and tell me, or leave a comment somewhere, you know, here, because I'm not very good at checking certain things like my Facebook page. I try to remember, but I'm just not very good at it. So anyway, on with the art, because I'll witter on about stuff no end. This drawing I did yesterday, and I left it without any shading, without any extra colour on, and I did post a picture in the comments section which you access, or can access if you're a subscriber. I'm not entirely sure you can if you haven't subscribed to the channel. I think you have to be a subscriber, I could be wrong. And anyway, so I knew there was something wrong with it, and thanks to somebody who pointed out that sorry, I can't remember who it was, that I needed more contrast, because I sort of like I worked that out, but I haven't worked out how to do it. So I'd already started trying yesterday with cross-hatching and intensifying ink there, here and there, and getting nowhere particularly with it. So this morning, there are a couple of things I want to show you, because pennies dropped is that cross-hatching may not be the way to go, but if I thicken the lines and make them just that little bit darker at the bottom, it seems to add some sense of volume and weight and shadow, but it's still not right. But on here, and the background was still a bit too samey in colour. So I've tried a couple of things on here, and there's a couple of things I'll show you separately. You can see something peeking out underneath, and there, you know, it's become a practice piece. It's become something to try things out on. I've definitely added more colour here. I've used Inktense. The background, I've used a sepia coloured Inktense pencil, which is a brownish colour. It's a cooler brown as well, because the cooler colours push things further into the background. Warm colours tend to want to rise to the top, as it were. So I've added some Inktense. I'm not quite sure I've got it deep enough yet. I did do some there. It's over here is the best examples, and that really does start to bring. You can see the difference between these that haven't had any Inktense put on them, and actually haven't had any of the pen line thickening. Even just with thickening the lines, adding more ink, that already starts to add more contrast, more volume to it. But it's when that extra stuff is added that magic happens. So I did say to Chen Keith that I would redraw something similar to this and show you how I shade it, or add colour and shade. And this one I have done, and you can see I've been using these ideas of getting those thicker, heavier lines where I want things to be darker. And there certainly is a lot more volume dimension in this one than there was where I left this one yesterday. And you can see the difference between these and these just with ink. So I'll show you how I do that. I do have a piece of paper because it's easier to show. It's nice to tell, but it is nice to show. And I'll carry on with that in a moment. I just need to do something. Okie dokes. Okay, so if I start with this, I'm sure is Spoolies. sure it's called Spoolies, this pattern. So I did draw this yesterday. So it starts with a circle and then a fairly straight line coming off. I tend to curve mine, but it doesn't make much difference. The longer this line, the bigger the spoolie will be. And then you just start drawing around that central spot, but the lines need to meet back at the end of this line, so they form a kind of a point. And what happens is you end up with them a bit oddly shaped. I really am not doing very well. I think I'm holding my pen awkwardly today because I'm trying to get my hand out of the way, my fingers out of the way, so you can see what's going on. And it always ends up looking a bit more like a shell than anything. I think it looks like the bottom of periwinkles. Yes, that's what I'm thinking of. Or periwinkles, the cone-shaped seashells. It's a bit more curved there, which is why I tend to think it looks curved. So so that's the basic one, and although there's some dimension there, there's not as much as there could be. So what I've been doing is I've been taking these and drawing them so that you get almost like a triangle. Well, it's a slopey triangle here. So if I show you, if I start here, right next to this triangle, and I want it to connect up with this next line like this. So what we end up with here is quite a lot of ink at the base, but we are also thickening the line, which happens to be on the left hand side here, but I don't think we need to get very bogged down in which side it is, because it depends where the overlap is rather than a light source. So let's go full Zentangle. Well, full Zentangle and shading, which isn't dependent on a light source. It's part of the pattern. So I tend to combine the two because I've drawn with a light source in mind since I can remember drawing things and adding shadow and highlight. So, but you can see that I'm also thickening these lines going up just to add some extra weight, and I will definitely be doing that on this last one, because that extra weight, the extra thickness here, will really separate this from the rest. So I've just added some weight there, and I also want to add some weight or thicken the line. Say the same thing. Add more ink. More black, less white. In this case, because the paper is just white. Like so. And I'm not doing a very good job here of getting these to fade in. Making a bit of a ham-fisted job, but it works itself through, and in the end of it all, it all becomes part of the texture and the way that you draw something, which is unique to you. So it's a bit clunky in places, but it's fine. But then you see these variations in shells and so on. The stripes in them aren't exactly perfectly uniform. Yesterday in this I did fill it completely in with black, but today I'm just going to leave it like that. So that, if we compare that with, say, this one I've done some work on, say one of these, the difference is quite apparent, I think. Okay, so the next one is this kind of shape. I haven't got that quite as That's a bit better, possibly. It is what it is, and it's a question of splitting that bottom section up into these bits. So it's the same kind of thing as thinking about making the outer lines thicker, but also adding weight at the bottom here where there would be shadow. If you think about, you do this where patterns overlap, and it just helps to suggest that there's some shadow there. And again, it's the same with the outside lines. If you make those thicker, it helps to separate them from the ones next door. And again, I haven't got any left on here that were undone in the other one, but you could see that at the beginning. Hopefully, if I start another one, you'll see what I mean. Doing this kind of thickening of lines is a really good use of flexible nib pens, like Fudenasuki pens, like so many brands now. But my favourite are the Tombow, the hard ones. They've got the green square on the side, not the blue. So you can see the difference. This does have some sort of sense of volume to it, but this has that little bit more. I'm not entirely convinced about this, but I think it's the best I can come up with, because the cross-hatching kind of works, but kind of doesn't as well. And I haven't worked out exactly how to get that. Oh yes, I have. Brain just clicked in, possibly. Might try that. Okay, because I've got some here. So rather than go on there, let's have a look on this one. Because what I'm thinking, so I've tried different things here. In this one, I've tried joining them together so you get these kinds of like very round endings, and that kind of works. But I just think that there's just that little bit more is needed. And I think what I'm going to do, so I'm just going to use lines with some dots on. And I'm going to make the lines longest where I want the darkest shadow, perhaps. The dots help to feather the end of the lines that little bit. Does that work? Which I think that does. Try it again on another one and just see. So I think I just went to town on the others, just a little bit too much. Okay. I'm not convinced. The other way I was thinking is by doing lines that come from the darkest side of these, which most probably would work. And I'm using an 01, and this, I think it's the paper because it's been wetted so often, moistened so often, the surface has changed on it, and it's soaking up these. Let's have a look on this one where it's a lot lighter. Oh, there we go, that's a bit better. And perhaps have the lines getting smaller and smaller, and perhaps more closer together where I want it darker. This is what sometimes happens, is I end up making a right mess of something that would have been okay if I hadn't mucked around with it, and it becomes something I can experiment with. No, I'm not convinced about that. This one was the better version. It's just not easy to know what the best is to do. Okay, so this is Swerve, and so I'll start a swerve here. Let me get my other pen. And again, it's one of these sort of like lines with a circle on the end. But in this case, we're not going back to the point where what we would be doing is the lines here would be parallel. So I'm going to draw another swerve here. So at some point you decide that you, instead of going round that way, you come around and off, and then you start to create another swerve, or another one of these. So the structure of this and the spoolies is so similar. But that's often the case with many, many patterns, you know. Okay, so this time, instead of going this way, I'm going to follow around here, because it's getting things that go in, different directions. I'll come back to that one maybe. Didn't want to go there. So here I've come to the end here. I don't want to go off the page. So for the next one, I think I may just go here, but do something that's just a little bit different. I just think you can sort of fit them together however it works best for you. Like this one is determined not to connect, so I'll turn it into another one of these, but it connects there, so all's well and good. But I'm not going to keep going round here. It is what it is now. And perhaps I could go that way, or I could go this way from here as well, and have one growing out, which is a bit more like a sand swirl, I suppose. They all are very similar, and they all have the same kind of basic structure. I guess Jude as well is another Zentangle pattern. But here this is a good example of, we can see here how, I'm just going to pop some circles there, just to disguise that little blip I had. How just adding this line weighting really does add this sense of volume, of texture, dimension, contrast to the pattern. And we can do the same kind of thing with these, where I can add that line weighting close to this overlap and just get the lines to become narrower in that direction. This line overlaps, so I'm going to thicken this line all the way along because it overlays everything, and that helps to separate things out, and especially if I create a much thicker line at the bottom where there would be naturally some shadow. The same here. And again with this one, it's that getting this lovely weighting and shadow going on. So it does make me happy when I see this working. Now if I look here, I can see that I've got these lines that are disappearing under here. So I'm going to add some weight to those as well, to show that they are disappearing under. And already I can begin to see just how dimensional all of this is becoming. And I'm being consistent about making my lines thicker to the bottom and the left. Clumsily. has to be said today again. And this reminds me a bit of oysteroid as well, how you add quite thick lines on one side of oysteroids, which I'll add here because I can. You start with a irregular shape, or whatever shape it is, because you end up with something that looks a bit like an oyster shell. So I've thickened that line too much on that side. I needed to neaten it up, and then you just draw around it, and you keep adding weight to the lines to the same side. So it's always the left and bottom with me. And here we'll carry on like so. This is really thick at the bottom as well now. And if I was to add colour, which I may do to this, I don't know yet, then you could intensify the colour or add shading here to help lift that up over this particular item. And as each layer of this oysteroid happens, the shape changes subtly and it becomes more and more of that kind of weird teardrop shape, or the rough teardrop shape you get with oyster shells, which is lovely. So you can see the comparison in the way that things work. Okay, so I'll just do a couple more here. This is the one that overlaps, so I do want some weight here, and of course this is to the left. This one also needs some weight there. We don't want it to thicken until we come right the way around to the left and the bottom. This is still underneath, even though it's on the right. We haven't completely gone vertical to the right, so we'll keep that nice and thick. These need to be made a lot thicker at the ends, as does that one. And some weight on these as well. As if we've got layers or little cracks there, and I'm not doing a very good job of it. But quite clumsy actually compared to that. It's the effect of doing the oysteroid, I think. So I'll do the same here. But hopefully you're getting the idea. It is practice. I have done some drawing this morning, but for some reason I'm not doing a very good job of drawing today. But all's fine and well. There we go. All right. So yeah, I've tackled everything that's there. I'll pop that to one side. I've been doing this on this one, which was the drawing I was doing this morning, because I wasn't doing it in very good light. I've got some patchy areas. Wasn't very light, as in didn't have good lighting this morning. Missed this one here as well, though. I haven't completed it completely. Completed it. Oh dear. It's going to be one of them days, I think. I've got some strange lines going on. We've got some here that need some as well. And there's a fair amount of work, I think, still to do on some areas here, but it's getting there, is what I think I want to say. This is getting there. Just having a quick check. It does help if I slow down, actually. because I can draw at a fast rate of knots, and sometimes that's counterproductive in some ways, because I then have to deal with a mess tidying up, or make a mess as I'm trying to tidy up. Whereas if I slowed down that little bit and got my lines that little bit more precise, things may not need so much fussing around with in this kind of way. Okay, just a couple more, I think. There's this one here then. Okay, I think that's mostly it. I haven't sort of like put shadow on every left line like I have here. The more you, the more you add line weight, the more that you add dimension. And you can see here how that much thicker line there seems to give this that extra lift up as well. So, this one really then could do with being made that bit thicker as well. And it just increases that size and distance. And perhaps the best way to do this is while you're drawing each loop around in some ways, because you can always then, well, I know what I'm trying to say is that it can be awkward once you've drawn these in, especially if you've drawn the lines very narrow to each other, to get that kind of dimension in. So it's to do it as you go, like I did with the oysteroids, I think is the trick. But again, it depends what you want, because you can add dimension to this just with shadow. So why don't we have a look at that? I have got, I've got the sepia pen here. So if I, pencil. So if I use just some sepia, this sepia coloured Inktense, where I want some of the shadows. So I'm putting shadow here where there's an overlap. So where these go underneath this, so I want these to be in shadow. Like here, I want these in shadow. There's an overlap here, so I want these in shadow as well. And I wouldn't mind having a little bit extended shadow there, and some shadow here. And we'll see what that looks like. I'm only doing it on the ones I haven't thickened the lines off for now. Damp paintbrush. I'm using Inktense pencils. They react with water, and you can spread the colour out as little or as much as you like. I tend to spread it out perhaps a little bit more than others would. I try to keep the colour very intense where I want the shadow the darkest. Here I'm just like so. That's better. So I'm just adding some darkness in where I've spread this out just that little bit too far. Okay, and already there's a lot of dimension happening. The secret to this, I've remembered, is just to pick up the edge of the colour and spread it out as far as you want the shadow to go. I'm actually going to colour the whole of these just slightly by the looks on it. So there we've got some stuff going on there. I'm just drying off my paintbrush a little bit, cleaning it off so I don't have too much colour on there. Again, I'm going to spread some of this colour out just to fill the parts in there so they are different from the paper. And then we'll have the darkest bits just there, as I've just moved my brush there just a little bit too much. Again, on this one, I am just going to pick up just the edges and move that colour around. I may not be able to colour all of this, mind you. It's quite a long length, but that's fine. And then we'll have these the darkest there, but I still want to just spread them out. This paper will dry quickly. It's not watercolour paper. It is all media paper, so it's a kind of thin mixed media paper. It takes the Inktense, it takes water fairly well. I'm just checking that all of this sepia has actually dissolved. I'm just moving it where I perhaps need a bit more as well, like round here would be quite nice. And so instantly that's added some dimension to it. Okay. For this one, again, I'm going to use the sepia here, but what I'm trying to do is to make sure the bottom bit here is darker than the top, and I want some along the edge here. It's almost like trying to think about leaving a highlight in the middle here somewhere. So I am going to activate this along the edges again. Just fill that central area in, just that little bit. Try to keep it as pale as possible where I want the highlight the greatest, which is going to be towards the top. So here there's going to be hardly any of that sepia, if any, in that middle section, because I want it to have, that's where my highlight is going to be. And here I'm going to go just that little bit darker, as if this is bending away. I may need a little bit more colour in places. Down here I'm going to need a little bit more at the base here, so I'm just picking some of the Inktense up with my damp brush from the pencil tip itself. It doesn't damage the pencil tip, it's fine to do this. Just if it's very wet, the tip, just let it dry before you put it away again. So there I've got that highlight. And that does give that kind of feel. It now looks like a fossil tooth or a fossil muscle almost, a belemite. But I'm quite okay with that. On this one, I'd be thinking about having more shadow over on this side and less towards middle bits, and then again, see if we can get that highlight. I am doing each section at a time because I find it easier to work section by section on things like this. It's easier to control how much. If I put my water on the other side, I won't have to reach across all the time, will I? I put it on the other side because I'm less likely to knock it over. Yeah, I know. So here, that wasn't a good idea, but it'll be fine, because I will make it be fine. And if there's not enough highlight there, later on I can look at using some white gel pen or something that, you know, some kind of white medium to lighten this up that little bit more. So we've got some dimension going on there. And again, I haven't done one for comparison, but you can see this one here, I'm just going to use the sepia here, and again I'm going to add a bit more around the left. We're going to have some at the base here, because that would be a way, perhaps a little bit round the edge, because again, you know, the edges are going to be lower, or, you know, further away, lower down, and they will have a little bit more shadow than ones that are towards the top. So every now and again I'm sort of like washing what Inktense I've got on my brush off, so that I can carry on with a lighter version of this colour. And where necessary I can just pick up a little bit more if I need a little bit more colour, which I'm likely to need round the top there. here I'm just activating all of this here. I'm going to wash my brush off so I can get rid of this line, blend it out. Again, trying to keep a lighter area as a highlight. Down here I've got Inktense that isn't activated, so we'll go back and do that, and that gives quite a bit of dimension. I think so. These ones are the most awkward ones for me to do, the most awkward ones to do. The others, as long as you try to keep the top light and on this side lighter and darker down here and under here, it should work out fine. The same here. I'm going to do one of these that has the ink in, and it's the same kind of idea as I've just done with the spoolies, or the spoolie. This is only one of them. Shadow where there's overlap, so we'll get some overlapping here, so we'll need some shadow where the lines are thickest. But let's see if I can actually get the best way to do this is to work from the lightest areas into the darkest, rather than try to work from darkest to lightest, because the Inktense is a really good name for these, because the colours really are Inktense. They're very intense. So a little bit goes a very long way with these. So it's better to be cautious and build up layers if your paper will take it, than it is to go, you know, gung-ho with it. Of course, the ideas are pretty much the same for most media, I would think. Alcohol pens, alcohol markers might be where I start darkest and work lightest, just depending on how I feel on the day when I'm doing it, or what kind of shape I'm working with. But here you can, you know, the comparison between this one, which has the thick lines, and these which just have, you know, lines of one thickness. There's dimension here, but those thicker lines really do enhance that dimension, the sense of layers, of depth and so on. And it is just playing with them. So here, what I've done, or what I'm beginning to do, is for these, instead of using sepia, I'm using red oxide, because it is the darkest, well, it's not the darkest red possibly, but it's a darkish colour, and I've got a bit of a thing about this red oxide colour. So plenty around the edge, and not so much elsewhere, and we'll just start to tease it out. With this, I don't want to fill all of this in with this red oxide either, because I want the distress ink colours that I've used to show through. So it is a case of blending it out at the edges, just to let it blend in with the colours that are already there. And I am adding some darkness to that side, because again, it tends to be working things through in layers with me. Maybe the influence of working, you know, colouring in digital art. I'm beginning to think in terms of layers. It's like here, I've done that, but I haven't added the shadow around the edge. You can see already the difference that has made and the intensity of that colour. Of course, it's on a camera, so it's a lot more vibrant, and as it dries, it will dull back just a bit. So I'm adding Inktense here, and I am adding it over the black because I know that it won't dull the black down too much. There's so much black, it's not going to do much. And I do want to add shadow around the edge as well. just to make sure that that fades. Oh, wrong. Yep, you can put pencils like this in water and wet the nib and use that directly. But with Inktense you get an awful lot of colour. I think I did that when I was colouring some fabric for some slow stitching, which I still haven't done that one. Got sidetracked. But it's there, it's all downstairs waiting for me, and I know what I'm doing. As soon as I pick it up, I'll go, right, okay, off we go again. At my crochet project. There we go. So instantly there's a lot more dimension there. Even though these are getting quite dark, and they are getting quite dark in colour, I'm darkening the background as well, so. And here I am just adding that colour towards the tip here, and I do want to add some around the outside. So I'm just going to intensify everything with this particular one as well. So I think I was a bit cautious with how much I put down when I did this. Because, say it's better to be cautious because you can always go back and add more. But when something like this dries, the Inktense dry permanent and you can't remove them. So you're stuck with what you've done basically. So caution is my watchword when I'm working with Inktense. I'm making sure that I have a paper that will take, you know, a couple of layers of water at least. So that's made a difference. It has. It really has. I haven't done all of these, but let's have a look at starting to add some of this red oxide in here so you can see what I'm doing. And again, I do want to add some around the outside. So I'm just extending where I want the shadows to go with these, and just making sure I've got enough of the Inktense down to cover the area I want to, and to keep the colour nice and dark where I want the darkest areas as well. So that's nice. And this is one that I really do need to put in my sketchbook and make notes next to it of what to do and what not to do. I didn't quite put enough Inktense down along the bottom here, so I'm just picking it up from the, around the outside. So I'm just picking it up from the tip of the pencil again and using that like paint almost, just to add that extra bit there. And it's amazing the difference this makes. I am going to see if I can do something about these, because they really are my bugbear. I don't know what possessed me to do that, but like many things I do, it always seems like a good idea at the time, and then afterwards I go, why did I do that? I know it doesn't work. Or as soon as I started it, I knew it wouldn't work, and off I go, I carry on blithely. I think here's some of that, the extra pen I've added is being picked up. But that certainly does send it backwards, and it's almost like that really is deep down. My problem now is that the background here is a lot lighter in colour than these, and that's where this sepia is coming in, because it can be quite a dark brown colour. And if I use this, hopefully, I say hopefully because it may not. I may need to use something like a black, but I'm able to darken the background enough that these might just stick up above it. So again, there's some there. Let's have a look at how that works next to these. Even though I'm using brown, that red of the Inktense is still standing out. So that does help. And I've added this up here, but I think I could definitely do with some more, and possibly some black. So I may go and find a black Inktense now. Of course, the principles I'm using here are the same, whatever medium you're using, or even if you're using, you know, just graphite or charcoal, chalk, soft chalk pastels. The idea is still the same, of where you put the darkest areas, the lightest areas. And here you can see how this is now beginning to lift up off the background. It's not as intense as I would like. So let me see if I can quickly find a black in here. I will have a problem, I'm sure, seeing a black. Oh, what's that one? That's bark. Don't want bark. Ink black will do. Yeah, it's dry now. So if you want to check whether something's dry, when things are damp, even slightly damp, they feel cool to the touch. So I have added black, even though it doesn't look like I have perhaps, but I have. And that has intensified that shadow. And I will add black in here as well, where I've got this one. This one here is lost against that. Lighter background, I'm afraid. So there's lots, oh, against the dark backgrounds have made that much way too dark. But you can see there. And that extra bit of black over there really has helped. I think it will in other places. So for example, in here it will help. Under here. As I've said, it is just layering up things, layering up the colour. Shadow and everything else, so. And even, I may just under this one, just put a little bit of sepia, just to add that extra bit of shadow. In fact, I must probably do need the black there, which will just add that extra bit of darkness. Might be needed in places where there's extra dark shadows, because here this is set further back than this, and this is further back than that, so we've got layers and layers where the shadows should get darker and darker. Last thing, let's have a look at these and see how these might work out, because I'm not entirely convinced this was the right thing to do with the lines at the base, but we'll see. You know, I'm going to have to pull some of this back, I think. Mess that one up quite a bit. What have I got? I have got some tissue here. See if we can pick some of that up before it dries. It's lost some of its yellowy golden redness, but I can replace that with, have a look here. This is mustard, which will do, I think. Just pick it up with the damp brush, and I can just add some of that yellowy colour back in that was there. This may not be exactly the same, but it'll be good enough for now. But I hope that's of interest to you and you find it useful. It's a bit of an odd kind of thing for me to do, because I am working and reworking something that I'm really not happy with, and I'm tidying up as I go. So it's what I do. But we've got, you know, another lesson how to draw on this, the shading and depth that you can get with both weight of line. In summary, if you thicken lines, you give dimension. Choose which side of your patterns you're going to add thickness to. You really need two that are connected. So I always go left and bottom, and I make those thicker. And where they overlap, I make the lines thicker as well, because that that implies darkness. Actually, these could have worked with a highlight across the middle. They'd look more like leaves. So there we are. And then when you add shadow, again, it's always darkest where there's an overlap or where things are further away. And it's just thinking about that. And if you apply these kinds of rules that you make yourself to the left and the bottom consistently, don't worry about light sources, don't worry about anything else. Treat adding shading as if you're adding to the pattern. It's part of the pattern. So in the same way, there's a repetitiveness about drawing Tangle patterns. So there's a repetitiveness about how you add shadow and thicken lines, line weight, and so on. And sometimes you do have to work in layers. You have to start with a little bit and then a slightly darker layer, slightly darker, until you get the intensity you want. I mean, here it's practically all black. There it isn't. When I put it flat, because the paper's warping a little because it's been wet, you can see the little gaps there. So there is variation. My application of colour isn't smooth, A, because this isn't watercolour paper, B, because I'm not good at it. But it gives that impression of it. Even here where I've made a complete and total pig's ear of bits, you can see here that this really does look like it's very far back and tucked under here. And then this end is beginning to stick up into the air. Here, this one, it's a very strange one because this would be in shadow and this will be in shadow. And we'd have quite a highlight here and so on. And how these, just by adding the shadow where they tuck under and at the ends and so on, it just helps to lift things and set things backwards. Using a cooler colour also helps to push things backwards. So it's probably this red is as saturated as this, but that warmth makes it feel that it's that much closer. Whereas putting shadow on it in some way will push it right back. And with the right medium, so I'm using Inktense, which when it's wet is transparent, translucent, see-through, that red colour will mix with it and it will still be there. It will be a warmer brown than the sepia, but not as warm, so it will push it back. It won't be as warm as everything around it in comparison. So I hope that's been useful. I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that what I've said has made sense. Thank you for joining me. And whatever else you do today, find time to be creative and look after yourselves. Bye for now. Hwyl, hwyl fawr. Ta-ta.